What's up, Taiwan? I'm Jeremy Olivier with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. Stocks are rallying here in Taiwan after U.S. President Donald Trump says he will impose a roughly 100% tariff on semiconductors.
So 100% tariff on all chips and semiconductors coming into the United States. But if you've made a commitment to build, or if you're in the process of building, as many are, there is no tariff.
Semiconductors are Taiwan's most valuable export. The country's stock market has reacted positively to news of the potential new tariffs, with the main TAIEX index closing up 2.37%. Taiwan's largest chipmaker, TSMC, has pledged to invest $165 billion for facilities in the U.S. state of Arizona. For more on the reaction in Taiwan to the latest Trump announcements, we go live to Chris Gorin here in our Taipei newsroom. So Chris, a 100% tariff on semiconductors sounds like it would be a huge problem for Taiwan. So why is the stock market reacting so positively?
Well, Jeremy, it seems that this announcement comes as a major relief to many companies in Taiwan because of that important caveat. Manufacturers who are building or plan to build plants in the U.S. will be exempt from these tariffs. Now, just to show you how excited investors in Taiwan seem to be, as you already mentioned, Taiwan's main stock index, the TAIEX, closed up 2.37%. Now, many of Taiwan's largest electronics manufacturers also saw big gains. Chip giant TSMC closed up almost 5%, reaching a record high. Foxconn up more than 4.5%. MediaTek up more than 2.5%. One company, Global Wafers, saw their shares rise so high that they triggered an automatic trade stoppage when they hit 10%. Now, many of today's biggest winners share one thing in common, which is their closeness to the iPhone maker Apple. At the same press conference at the White House where these tariffs were announced, Apple CEO Tim Cook also said the company would invest another $100 billion in U.S. manufacturing, and Apple listed Global Wafers, a Taiwanese company, as a partner in that investment. Now, it's important to note that Trump's comments did not come with an executive order, and there's no official version of what this policy will be. And so it leaves a lot of questions still. I mean, some of the biggest players in semiconductors, like Taiwan's TSMC, has already made the biggest investment in U.S. history for its plants in Arizona. Other big manufacturers like Samsung and SK Hynix also planning major facilities there, and they would seem to be exempt. But 100% is a lot of tax, and it's unclear exactly who would be paying it and how much these companies would need to invest in order to be exempt. Now, today, Taiwanese officials were being questioned about this, and here's a little bit of what some of them had to say.
那部分会受影响，部分不受影响，但受影响者呢，多半我们访谈下来，多半来讲，因为它的主要竞争者都是一样被课征100%哈。的关税，所以台湾目前在全球领先的地位上，我想领先者跟竞争者如果是站在同一个起跑线上的话，领先者还会继续领先哦，这是我们目前初步的看法。
但是对我们来说，我们的谈判团队一定会持续的跟美国争取，也一并讨论在对等关税的谈判里面，要把232以及供应链合作一并纳入。那我想今天的这个川普所公布的内容，并不影响我们接下来谈判的这个策略以及我们的步骤。
Now, I've spoken to several market analysts about this today, and one from the firm IDC Asia Pacific told me that if in fact Taiwanese chip makers are being exempted from tariffs, that could give them an even bigger edge in the US market, especially against European competitors like Infineon, who have not made the kind of commitments to US manufacturing that some other companies have. Another analyst, Gary Ung from Natixis, told me that these exemptions that are being announced show that although the Trump administration is trying to use tariffs as a policy to bring manufacturing back to the United States, the U.S. demand for AI and electronics, it still relies on foreign companies to meet that demand. So until we have more clarity about how these 100% tariffs will work, we can't be 100% sure about what the impact will be. Jeremy?
Thanks, Chris. That was Chris Gorin live from our newsroom in Taipei. Tokyo Electron has confirmed a now-fired employee at its Taiwan office is involved in an IP case being investigated by Taipei prosecutors. It comes after 3 former TSMC staff were arrested on Tuesday for allegedly leaking information about the company's advanced technology. Prosecutors raided the Taiwan branch of Tokyo Electron as part of their probe. The Japanese firm says it has not found any evidence of trade secrets being shared with third parties and that it's fully cooperating with the investigation. A U.S. senator has demanded a response from American chipmaker Intel over its new CEO's connections to China. In a letter sent to Intel, Republican Tom Cotton asked the company whether it was aware of Lip-Bu Tan's previous ties to Chinese tech firms when it hired him last March. Before Intel, Tan was CEO of Cadence Design Systems, which recently pleaded guilty to illegally selling U.S. technologies to companies with Chinese military connections. Cotton asked what Intel knew about Tan's Chinese investments and if they required him to divest from any companies. The senator also noted that Intel has received nearly $8 billion in federal funding for chip technology, the largest grant to a single company. U.S. President Donald Trump said he could put heavier tariffs on Chinese products as China continues importing Russian oil. John Van Trieste has this report.
U.S. President Donald Trump says heavier tariffs could be coming for China. That's as Washington tries to get China and others to stop buying Russian oil. Already, Trump's raised tariffs on India to 50% over its imports of Russian oil, a move India has condemned as, quote, unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. But Trump says further tariffs on China are, for now, just a possibility.
On the India penalties, do you have any similar plans to enact more tariffs on China as it relates to their purchases?
Could happen. Depends on how we do. Could happen.
This talk of fresh tariffs comes as Trump tries to get Russia to end its war with Ukraine. And on Wednesday, after Russian talks with a U.S. envoy, he said there's a good chance the leaders of the two sides, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, could sit down together.
Well, there's a very good prospect that they will. And we haven't determined where, but we had some very good talks with President Putin today. And there's a very good chance that we could be ending the round, ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
But as Trump tries to end the war in Ukraine, there are signs his choices come with a diplomatic price. One analyst says India-U.S. relations have been bad before, but not this bad in a long time, as India braces for $64 billion in lost exports.
I think that this is the lowest point that U.S.-India relations have experienced over the last 2 decades of strategic partnership. It's not the worst moment in the history of U.S.-India relations, and that's because there were some really dark days for this relationship during the Cold War, particularly during the last few decades of the Cold War, and also when India formally became a nuclear weapons state in the late 1990s. That prompted U.S. sanctions that really plunged the relationship to a low.
And while India-China relations are marred by tensions and territorial disputes, there are hints of a thaw as both countries face hefty U.S. tariffs. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi hasn't been to China in 7 years, but he's now heading there for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit that starts August 31st. So if Trump goes ahead with tariffs on both, it might help the situation in Ukraine, but drive 2 big rivals in Asia closer together. Leon Lien and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. says there's no way his country would be able to stay out of a conflict between China and the U.S. over Taiwan. He says the Philippines' geographical proximity to Taiwan and the large Filipino community living there means Manila would be drawn into any potential war. Marcos also called for stronger defense ties with India to ensure regional security. He made the comments to Indian media while on a 5-day state visit to India. What do EV batteries, stainless steel, and solar panels have in common? They all require nickel, a raw material largely sourced from Indonesia. But while it's a key part of the green energy transition, mining it can be harmful to the local environment and workers' health. NGOs from Indonesia and Taiwan are joining forces to bring awareness to this issue and some Taiwanese companies' involvement in the industry. Tiffany Wong reports.
39-year-old Johan Sapara has been working at Morowali Industrial Park, Indonesia's largest nickel processing site, for 4 years. The raw material, called nickel pig iron, is an essential component for stainless steel and now EV batteries. But it's hard work that also exposes workers to harmful pollutants and extreme temperatures. Over the years, Sapara says he's seen hundreds of workers get sick. There was even a deadly accident at his workplace, the Indonesian subsidiary of Taiwanese wire and cable manufacturer Huaxin Lihua. Now he's come to the headquarters in Taipei to call for change.
This is an upscale company, so it should also have top-grade safety measures, including a more advanced public safety setup.
No dirty mining.
Sapara is part of a group of advocates from Indonesia visiting Taipei to call attention to problems in Indonesia's nickel industry. Huaxin Lihua says the company follows corporate sustainability practices and found inconsistencies in reports from NGOs. But besides worker safety, there are environmental concerns too. Indonesia has the world's largest nickel reserves, and industrial parks there are projected to account for 62% of global production by 2030. They also happen to be in some of the most biodiverse places in the world. And as demand for green energy continues to grow, so do the impacts of resource extraction and production.
If we want to transition to green energy, it's useless because the supply chain is created at the cost of hurting human rights and biodiversity.
While in Taiwan, these advocates spoke with representatives from Taiwan's government and Taiwanese companies operating in the nickel industry, urging them to update their practices. Taiwan's economy ministry appears receptive to the demands, but representatives say change could take time.
那目前的话，因为要考量我们企业的适应能力哈，还有国际上它供应链变化，它需要一些调试的时间。我们目前是先用鼓励的方法，请他们做完以后，放到那个永续报告里面来呈现哈，那逐步的来推动落实。
Taiwanese operations are a minority in these industrial parks in Indonesia, largely dominated by Chinese ventures. But advocates say better practices from Taiwanese firms and more oversight by overseas investment bureaus can still make a difference in the industry. They've already seen some European companies cancel investments in the parks after weighing environmental costs.
We hope that international investment do not rely on the low standard of the Indonesia regulation on protection of workers' safety and health problem.
With demand for nickel not going anywhere, these advocates will have a lot more work ahead of them as they speak up for the health and safety of their communities and try to shift global regulations. Joseph Wu, Scott Huang, and Tiffany Wang in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
University students are urging lawmakers to pass an online media funding law that would make it mandatory for international platforms to negotiate prices for local online news content. It comes after lawmakers failed to reach an agreement on the draft act on Tuesday.
站在业界的立场来说，我们还是希望有一个法规的保障，不管是政府要出面，还是说透过什么样法规的力量，让大型平台能够出面来实质的面对这件事情。
The students are also calling for funding to support local journalists in Taiwan amid what they call a deteriorating environment. They say outlets are forced to rely on advertorials while multinational digital platforms have long exploited them. Canada and Australia have passed similar bills in recent years. The digital ministry says it will continue cross-party talks, but that without buy-in from international platforms, legislation would be meaningless. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more of our stories. Finally, take a look at Bulgaria's Lunar Festival, where dazzling projections light up the Black Sea coast. I'm Jeremy Olivier. Take care, and see you next time.